Welcome to JonGetsGames. As selected by the voting level supporters of our Patreon page, today I'll be reviewing Alien Frontiers. This hard sci-fi themed worker placement game uses dice as workers. You'll be rolling them and modifying them with alien technology before utilizing them to construct colonies on an alien planet. First, we'll go over some gameplay examples to teach you the rules as well as get a feel of how the game plays, and then I'll jump into my review. Here's the starting setup for a 3-player game of Alien Frontiers. You'll notice there are already some red dice out on the board. They are from the non-playing character. They kind of tighten up the board, so those spots we can't go into and we'll never be able to remove those dice. I'm going to explain how to play the game through a series of turns, which will explain all the different options, but will also give you a feel for what the thought process is behind playing the game. So we're the yellow player here. We start the game with these 3 dice. You can get up to 3 more, which is nice, but in the beginning we just take all of the dice we have and we roll them. This is a worker placement game, and these dice are the workers. On each turn, you can put every one of your dice out onto the board in different locations and evaluate them. However, each location is restricted by the number of slots they have, as well as certain ones require like a pair over here, a 3 of a kind over here, and this one requires a straight of numbers. We know that we can generate more workers. We start with 3, but we'd like to get 4, 5, or 6. And so if we look at the shipyard, we see that we're going to need a double, which we have. However, it'll also cost a single fuel and a single ore for that 4th ship, so we can't quite do that this turn. Instead, we should probably try to get fuel and ore to set up next turn being able to grab that ship. So if we look at the lunar mine, we see that you can put dice here as long as they are greater than or equal to previously played dice. There's already this red one here, so that means pretty much any die can go here. That gives us a pretty cool option. We could take both of these ones and put them on the mine, and each die is going to generate a single ore. So usually, it's hard to get ore out of here with low value dice because people like to put high value stuff in here, but we're the first player. We can sneak in and take 2 ore, and finally we need fuel, so we can take this 4 and put it over at the solar converter. There are no restrictions at all for the solar converter beyond 8 max dice, and we look at the little grid and we see that 4 on a die is going to get us 2 fuel for our person. We've put all of our workers out, so this ends our turn, and it would now go to the player on the left. Alright, so the blue and green player have gone. It looks like the green player was able to build another die, and now it's back to our turn, and there's quite a bit more going on the board. The first thing that you do on your turn is you take every die of your color and you pull them off the board and then you roll them. Looks like we got lucky. We were hoping for a double in order to activate the shipyard, but we got more than a double. So we can take these 2 ones right here and we can put them down in the shipyard because there's an open slot and because they are equal to each other because of this little equal sign on the board. So then we pay a single fuel and a single ore because we're getting our 4th ship. And that ship is going to come into the maintenance area and we'll be able to grab that and roll it at the beginning of our next turn. So now we're left with a single worker and it's a 1 value. There's not a whole lot we can do when we look out to the board. We can't get ore because it has to be 3 or higher. We can get some fuel, but it would only be a single fuel. So instead, what we're going to do is look to the colony hub down here. If we take a die, and we can put a die of any color down onto this slot here, we're essentially calling this row, and there's enough rows for each player to have their own. If you put a die down and you don't have any colonies in process, then you're going to go ahead and take one of those colonies and put it to the first slot in this track right here. Each subsequent die put into the colony hub is going to push this little colony forward once until they get all the way to the end. And at that point, you can spend a single fuel and an ore to send that colony down to the surface of the planet, but we'll get to that in a minute. Alright, it's our turn again, and you'll notice we lost an ore. That's because green went to this raider outpost. You'll see that it always has to be a sequentially ordered set, so we have a 2, 3, and 4. And when you go there, you can steal up to 4 resources from a variety of players. So they stole a single ore from us and 3 ore from the blue player. So pretty unfortunate for both of us. And now we grab all of our dice, including this new one that we made last turn. So now we have 4 workers, which really increases the amount of stuff that we could do with our turn. There are a couple different stations that I haven't talked about yet, so let's go ahead and activate one of those. Let's start by taking this 6 here. We can put it down on the lunar mine to take an ore that replaces the one that was stolen from us by green. And now we can take this other 6 here and put it onto the terraforming station. You'll see it has a 6 printed on the board. That means that only 6s can go there. When you activate that terraforming station, you need to spend a single fuel and a single ore in order to immediately turn that spaceship into a colony and shoot it down to the planet. So we go ahead and get rid of our fuel and our ore, and we immediately take a colony from our supply and put it straight down onto the planet. When you look at the planet, you'll see that it's split up into 8 different regions with these dotted lines, and there are all these little tiles on them. These are bonuses that you get if you control a territory, and you control it if you have more colonies in a spot than anybody else. So if you're the first person to go down, then you're going to get to take that tile as well that shows that you control it. Each colony on the planet gets you 1 victory point, and each territory that you control also gives you a victory point. So in this case, we just generated 2 points, and we show it on this track over here. The reason you want these tiles is because they all give you bonuses. If you look at this one right here, it's a bonus for the Herbert Valley, and you pay 1 fuel and 1 ore less every time you use the shipyard. This is really good for us because we just destroyed a ship in order to land this colony, so this will make it much cheaper to get more ships going in the future. At this point, we don't have too much to do with these 2 dice, so we go ahead and take them and put them in the colonist hub. This is essentially what you do with dice. You're not sure what to do. You'll just push your little colony forward, just getting it closer and closer to dropping it on the planet, getting more victory points, and grabbing more tiles. So it's our turn again, and it looks like blue was able to create a new ship, and green was able to use the colony constructor. For this one, you have to place 3 dice that are all the same value, but you also need to spend 3 ore in order to do that. They were able to do this because they stole a bunch of ore from everybody on that last turn. When you do the colony constructor, you immediately take a colony disc, you put it down on the board, it looks like they went into the Bradbury Plateau and they took the bonus. If you look at the board, you'll also see that it's printed here. It just has a minus ore, and you'll see that it's kind of connected here. That just means if you have that bonus, it costs you 1 less ore when you do this colony constructor, so in the future, green can do it for only 2 ore. The die we used for the terraforming station is gone, so we remove that from the board, and then we take the rest of our dice and we go ahead and roll them. Cool, so I think this is a good spot to show you how the alien artifact area works. If you'll see, you can put up to 4 dice here, or anybody really can, and if you put dice whose values are equal to or greater than 7, then you can take one of these 3 alien artifact cards and put it into your possession, and they give you really good bonuses as the game goes on. So we'd probably take this 5 and a 4, and we put that down here. 5 and 4 equals 9, which is greater than or equal to 7. So now we can grab one of these 3, and let's take a look at them. The booster pod is pretty simple. It says if we pay a single fuel, we can add 1 point to one of our unplaced ships. So if we rolled a 4, we can spend a fuel and turn it into a 5. That's pretty cool. We've got a alien monument, which is really simple. You get 1 victory point if you possess this card, so just holding this would scoot us up on this track, so that's pretty great. It's important to note that when people go to this Raiders outpost, they can take up to 4 resources, or they could steal one of these alien artifact cards from somebody. So while you might have that victory point for now, somebody might come in and steal it from you later on. The last one is this polarity device, which is I think the one we want to go for. You see it says pay 1 fuel to flip one of your unplaced ships to its opposite face. So this is really great. It can turn a 1 into a 6, which would be a very good thing when you're trying to make ore. So let's go ahead and take this card and put it in front of us. Whenever there's a slot open, we go ahead and draw the top card, and it looks like, oh, it's a stasis beam. This is the opposite of the booster pod. You can spend a fuel to remove a value from one of your dice, which can be important sometimes when you're trying to make a run or make a 2 or 3 of a kind. Lastly, it's good to know that you can always put a single die of any value down into the alien artifact zone to get rid of all 3 of these cards and draw 3 new ones. Since we have this cool power that needs fuel to activate and we have no fuel, we can go ahead and take this 6, put it into the solar converter, and that would get us 3 fuel. It's important to note that you can only use each of your alien technologies once per turn, so 3 might be a bit overkill, but as you can see, fuel is useful for a variety of reasons. So here it is, our turn again, and it looks like both blue and green created new ships, so that's not great. Blue is up to 5 ships. They can start doing a lot of stuff on their turn, and we only have 3, so we go ahead and take all of these back, and we roll them. And in order to do the final demonstrations, I'm going to cheat a bit. I'm going to push this colonist a little bit forward in the hub. Don't worry about it, you didn't see anything. So now we have a colony that's 1 away from the end of this track, and we want to get it there to land it on the planet to kind of go after green's zone here. But when you land a colony on the planet from the colony hub, it takes a single fuel and a single ore. We only have fuel right now, but we have 2 different ways we can go about getting the ore that we need. The first thing would be just going to the lunar mine, but we can't do that, right? Because the highest value here is a 4 and we just have 1s and 2s. But we can make a 6 by using this polarity device we just got. We can spend a single one of these fuels and take this 1 and flip it to its opposite side. There it is, it's a 6, and now we can take this and plunk it down on the board, which gets us the ore that we need. The other option, if we were to put this back to the way it was, it's not as efficient, but it shows off a cool mechanic. You can take these 2 2s here and put them on the orbital market over here. The way this works is you can convert fuel into ore at a ratio of whatever the value of dice you put down here. They have to equal each other. So if we put 2 2s down, then we can spend 2 fuel in order to get a single ore. Likewise, if we put 2 5s down there, we can spend 5 fuel to get 1 ore, but that wouldn't be very good. So we could put this here, we could take both of these fuels, get rid of them, and this would generate the ore we need. Obviously, this is significantly less efficient than the first way, but it's definitely an option you can consider. So finally, we take this guy right here and we put it over in the colonist hub, which pushes it to the end. We spend our ore and our fuel, which lets us drop the colony down onto the planet. So we can put it in all these different zones, but it's much more fun to drop into a zone that somebody else is in. Once a player does not have a strict majority in a region anymore, they actually lose the bonus that's associated with it. So this tile is going to come back here, green is going to lose that point, and they're no longer going to get the benefit that that bonus was going to give them. And lastly, of course, just putting a single colony on the planet would give me a single victory point. Play is going to continue this around and around the board until one player places their last colony on the planet. At this moment, the game ends immediately, and we check over here to see who has the most victory points. That player is the winner. I'm going to briefly explain the 6 different region bonuses that I didn't get to in the rules. So if we look over here, we have the Lem Badlands, and it means every time you put a die into that solar converter that gets you fuel, you're going to get an extra fuel for each die put down. That's pretty great. We have the Hainan Plains, which makes that market that lets you trade fuel for ore at a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 ratio. If you have this bonus, it's always 1-to-1. We have the Pole Foothills, which is really nice. It means that each card that you activate, each alien artifact, gets a -1 fuel cost associated with it. So this polarity device, if you had the Pole Foothills bonus, would be free to use. Again, only once per turn. Next we have the Burrows Desert. If you control this zone, you can spend a single fuel and a single ore in order to get access to this artifact die, which you can join in with the rest of your dice. Really nice thing about this is if you're ever able to terraform it by making it a 6, you get to buy it back for the super cheap rate instead of this really expensive ships down here. Next is the Asimov Crater. It says that whenever you put at least 2 dice down into the colony hub, you get your usual 2 movement, but then you get an extra bonus move. And finally, the Van Vogt Mountains simply lets you put a single die into the lunar mine each turn that breaks this rule. So you can put a single 1 down here, even though there's all these 4s, but you only get to do that once per turn. For my review of Alien Frontiers, I'll be going over each item of this list, starting at the top and working my way down to the bottom. So let's start with those positives. And the first of these has to do with the way that Alien Frontiers goes away from the standard round-based architecture that most worker placement games live in. Most worker placement games involve everybody putting their workers down in some fashion until they're all on the board, and then you clear them all off, somebody becomes the new starting player, and you begin a new round with an empty board. Alien Frontiers says, nah, I'm not going to do that. We're just going to keep going around the table until the game is over. And what this means is, so in a standard worker placement game, you have like 3 phases to a general round. You have an empty board where you have lots and lots of options. You have kind of a congested board where you have some good options, but definitely not all the ones you want. And then you have the late round where there's almost nothing left, and you're like, I have nothing good to do with this piece. Alien Frontiers treads right down the middle of that very well, so the board is always well congested, but not too congested or too open, because at all times, all of your opponent's pieces are out on the board. So that's a very cool idea that make this game feel definitely fresh to me, and it also takes away that necessity to always be gunning for being the first player in the next round. Well, there are no rounds in this game. You just need to continue doing the best that you can, and I really like that change to the worker placement mechanic. Positive number 2 is more of a personal one for me, and that is that I love the hard sci-fi theme that is just spilling out of every corner of this game. When I was young, I was borderline obsessed with hard science fiction novels. I would spend hours at the library pulling every book from the sci-fi section off and looking at the front cover, reading the back. I read every single book they had in that section for Isaac Asimov, and I read Heinlein and Herbert. I just love this setting. It's very nostalgic for me, and so when I'm playing Alien Frontiers, it really pulls me right back into it because the art is exceptional, and it also just really encapsulates that vibe. I feel like when I'm playing this, I'm seeing all these different things that could have been on the front covers of all those books that I loved so much when I was a kid, and that really increases the enjoyment for this game for me, and I think a lot of people also like this space theme that is also a retro sci-fi kind of thing going on where things are what the future looked like in the 70s, and I just love the way it comes together in this game, and it really makes it pop for me. And now let's go into my first neutral point, and that has to do with the actual dice rolling portion of the game. These dice are normal, they go from 1 to 6 in their values, and so when you roll a whole bunch of those in this type of game, you want the outcome of that dice roll to restrict your options and give you interesting decisions. However, you don't want to be crestfallen if you rolled a low set or really happy if you rolled a high set, because you don't want randomness to become too big of a factor in this sort of thing. And I think that Alien Frontiers could have done a slightly better job of balancing out and equalizing low to high rolls. I don't think if you roll high consistently the whole game, you will definitely win, but it's going to give you a small advantage. There's a couple reasons for that. If you roll high, you're going to get more ore from the lunar mine, you're going to grab more fuel from the solar converter, you'll be more efficient at grabbing cards from the alien artifact section, and of course you need 6s in order to use the terraforming station, which is very important. Versus if you roll low, then you get to do better at the trading outpost. Obviously you want low numbers to get a good conversion ratio, and you need a low number or two in order to effectively use that raiding outpost. So that's a pretty big difference to me, and obviously that colonist hub is pretty equal. You could put a 1 there or a 6 there, and they do the same thing, so there's no benefit there. So I wish that maybe they made the solar converter inverted so that 1s and 2s gave you 3 fuel and 5s and 6s only gave you 1 to kind of counterbalance this slight advantage that you get for just happening to roll high. But as I said, ultimately it doesn't break the game. I just wish it had been given a little more thought. Neutral number 2 has to do with downtime and the fact that it can definitely become an annoyance in 3 to 4 player games, especially in the mid to late game. And the reason for that is because at that point, you're going to have a whole bunch of dice that you just rolled, you're going to have several alien artifacts, and you're going to have quite a few options that you can do. You can increase or decrease the value of this die, you can flip a die, you can add 1 to 2 different dice, and you could do all sorts of manipulation to this hand. And then you're looking out on the board and you're trying to decide what the best thing to do is, and then can you even get there? And you're having a really good time while you're doing that. I always enjoyed that puzzle, flipping stuff around and doing this kind of thing. But if you ever looked up at everyone else around the table, you'd realize they're all on their phones, or they're just kind of really bored because there's not much that you can do when somebody is having one of those really long turns. Now, I know some people talked about having a variant where everybody has a shield and you can roll your dice at the end of your turn and really think about what you could do until it comes back to you. And that would probably remedy this to a certain extent, but ultimately, each person puts a lot of dice down on the board, so it's very likely that the person, even just to your right, is going to do something that's going to stop that whole plan that you had going already, even if you were the next player. And then you have to just start over again from scratch and then just figure out what the thing you want to do is. So I feel like something potentially could have been done to reduce the downtime a bit. Ultimately, the best thing you could do is probably not play 4-player as much, but I'll get into that when I go over the player count. Neutral number 3 is honestly more of a warning, and that is that Alien Frontiers has the potential to be quite mean based on the playgroup that you play with. I have played games of this where that raiding outpost is constantly full because it's not that hard to get a run of 3 dice, especially with 1 or 2 alien tech dice manipulations. And then when you do that, you get to steal important alien tech cards from other people or just steal their resources from a variety of players. So there have been times where I just feel like I can't get around the table back to my turn without having lost almost everything that I gained on the last turn. And in those instances, well, I feel like, well, I gotta mess that guy up because he took all my stuff. I'm gonna try and make a run of 3 and steal his stuff back, and it's an ongoing pervasive thing. The flip side is I've played many games of this that were pretty much completely passive, and that Raiders Outpost lay dormant the whole game, and everybody was just trying to do better at their own thing without really sticking their fingers in other people's pies. So it very much depends on the playgroup and the people that you specifically play with. I don't think that the Raiders Outpost is crucial to winning. It is just, it has the ability to vastly change the temperature and attitude of the game based off of who you like to play with. So now let's go into my one negative for Alien Frontiers, and that is that I really dislike the way the endgame trigger for the game makes the game into this crazy mad race to get all of your colonies out onto the planet as fast as humanly possible to the exclusion of everything else. And that's because the game ends once one person puts their last colony onto the planet and then you see who has the most victory points. The issue for me is that that person is always the person who wins because almost all the victory points you get in the game come from those colonies down on the planet and controlling the different regions, and putting a single colony down oftentimes can give you control of a region, which gives you a point, or at least takes control away from that main opponent that you had, reducing the points that they have. And obviously, someone would not place their last colony onto the planet ending the game unless they'd win anyway. But after playing the game about 5 or 6 times, I just couldn't get over how much that irked me, because there's all these other cool things that I want to do that I would spend my time doing, and I wouldn't end up winning almost ever, because the things I want to do are build cool engines and do neat dice manipulations and do cool combos on my turn, not just spend all of your time hitting that terraforming station as much as possible and getting 3 of a kinds and getting ore to just keep spamming that colonist constructor. That feels like, that's not interesting to me. There's so many other things you can do. I don't want to just spend my whole time doing those 2 things and then trying to make some ships to make up for the fact that I'm destroying them all the time in that terraforming station. So I actually house ruled the game after about 6 plays. I changed it so that the game ends once one person hits a victory point threshold based on the number of players. I think it was like 8 points for a 4-player game, something like that. And I like the game way more because of that, because you could do a really cool turn where you have a 3-point swing based off of a couple things that you can do with discarding cards and putting colonies on the planet, and you win the game, and you might not even have all your colonies down, and I just found that a much more satisfying experience. So take that as you will. I did actually change the endgame trigger for the game to make the game more pleasurable for me. I didn't hate it with the old endgame trigger, it just never really sat right with me. Now let's talk about replayability. As I mentioned in my one negative point, I felt after 5 or so plays that there was only one way to win the game, and that was to just make ships as much as you can, to immediately destroy them in the terraforming factory, and then try to get 3 of a kinds and lots of ore to just get those colonies down the planet as fast as possible, and that was the only way it seemed to win. So I actually house ruled it, as I said, to increase the replayability, to make the different winning options much more varied. So I think as the game ships, the replayability is okay, but that's definitely a flaw of the game, having that one better strategy. With my fix to the game, I got a whole bunch of plays. I ended up playing this game 13 times, so if I only played 5 games with a base set and 13 times total, well, I played it way more with my modification, and I enjoyed it much, much more, and it got a lot more longevity, so you need to keep that in mind. Also, this game has a bunch of expansions, and I've bought several of them, but I haven't actually got any of them to the table. And I really should, honestly, because I might find that some of those expansions might vary up that one dominant strategy with the base way that the endgame triggers. So I'll give that a shot, but just as far as the base game is concerned, there are potential issues. You might also want to change it like I did. Alright, let's discuss some different player counts now. Alien Frontiers plays 2 to 4 players, and mechanically, they all feel quite similar. In the smaller games, you put more dice out on the board that are just always there to lock down some of the stations. But the way the games actually turn out is that, well, in 4-player games, downtime is just a monster. It's enough to make me not recommend it, because it can just take so long to get back to you once you hit the mid to late game, and I just don't like being bored while I'm playing a game. There's really not much to think about while other people are doing all their different dice manipulations. If I had 4 people here and 3 of them really wanted to play it, I would play a 4-player game, but I would never go out of my way to do that. The flip side is with the 2-player game, it also plays pretty well, but this game can have a little bit of runaway leader show up in a 2-player game, because you only have that one person to interact with that. And if one person's doing really well, the other person might not be able to really slow them down. Also, if you're playing with a mean player where you're just stealing stuff back and forth, you only have that one other person to be mean to, so it can really be a slap fest as you're beating each other up. So I think 3-player is the sweet spot, because you have a little bit more downtime than the 2-player game. However, you can have 2 people kind of gang up on somebody who seems to be doing really well. Also, if lots of resources are getting stolen, well, there's another person who might have their stuff stolen instead of yours, or you could just spread out the pain amongst a lot of your opponents and not necessarily feel as bad about just keep beating down the same person, which is the thing that can happen to me sometimes. In conclusion, I think that Alien Frontiers did a great job of shaking up the worker placement genre when it came out back in 2010. It seemed like at that point that 1 in 3 games were worker placement games, and they all played so similarly. And then here comes Alien Frontiers, and you're rolling dice and using them as workers, and you just keep playing around and around the table. You never clear everything off. I remember several posts on Board Game Geek where people were confused. They wanted to know who the new starting player was, because they just assumed you cleared everything off the board because that's the way every worker placement game worked. And it's like, no, that's not how Alien Frontiers works. Leave those pieces out on the board. This is new, this is different, this is great. And when you add on to that the awesome theme that really pulls me in, as well as great dice manipulation, I was super excited about this game, and I had a lot of fun with it. But that does not take away from the fact that I think there are some definite issues here. The biggest one is the fact that I house ruled the endgame condition. After 5 games of it, I felt like my back was to the wall, because I wanted to love this game so much. I loved the ideas and mechanisms in here, but I hated seeing this dominant strategy, which wasn't even that fun to play. And you might find in your play group that that was not a dominant strategy for you, but it seemed like that's the way every single game played out. And I felt like I had to house rule it. I really don't like house ruling games, but once I did, I enjoyed it a lot more. So you need to keep that in mind when it comes to this review, because a lot of my gameplays came with a slight modification to the rule set. I think as the game came in the box with the rules as printed, there were some definite issues there which made it an okay game, but definitely a flawed game. With my modification, I enjoyed it much more, but there are still some flaws there. Downtime is still a definite beast, and I feel like you really should have equal opportunity when you roll those dice. You don't want low rolls to inherently always be worse than high rolls, even if it's a slight edge type of situation. So if you enjoy worker placement games and you love rolling dice, there is a definite chance that you will enjoy this game, but you need to go into it knowing there are several flaws that may become apparent to you. You may be okay with them, or they might bring down the experience for you. If you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, if you'd like to become more involved with the channel, you can directly support it at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.